Hi everybody. I just converted this video, so hopefully this live stream will be better than the last one. Apparently, when you upload videos to YouTube, it has to be MOV, which I never used that format before. Um, I woke up late because that drug dealer down the street was ringing my doorbell. I don't know why he keeps doing that because I'm not letting him in. I wish he would give up, but anyway, let's get through this live stream because apparently some people are getting something out of this content because someone was telling me they were taking notes. So, I mean, I'm doing this content for a reason because we have been misguided. We've been told a bunch of lies about the way things are. Um, and so we're going to clear up things about what freedom is, what rights are. Somebody was recently talking to me about rights, and I'm just like, there's I mean, that's not a right. I mean, it was in the context of animals, and I was trying to explain intellectually what a right is, and it's just like, oh, you just don't care about animal. No, you just don't understand what a right is. They've been telling us what rights are, but what they're talking about, they're not rights, they're privileges. If it's n- if it's not a right under natural law, then it's a privilege. It's something that the government created, which the government can take away. So that's why it's important to understand the difference. All right, y'all. So let's go ahead and get started with this clip. This is another one by Ayn Rand. She's not the only one, but I use Ayn Rand just because she kind of I don't know, she articulated very well and she doesn't leave anything out. So if I were to use somebody else, I would probably have to pull a whole bunch of clips. But when I use her videos, it's going to be pretty comprehensive. Okay, let's see which one I want to use. Let's use this one. Okay.
Let me ask you this question first about human rights. You've spoken favorably in these lectures about the right to freedom of speech and other human rights, but I take it you would not assent to the usual list of rights so much publicized these days, such as the right to a minimum standard of living, the right to equality of opportunity, the right to a free education, and so on. Now, many listeners will surely want to ask, why? What's the basis of the distinction? That is the fundamental question that I'm really asking that's at the bottom of this is, what is a right? Can you define the term right in such a way as to make a distinction like this clear?
Yes, certainly. To begin with, a right is a moral concept applicable only in a social context. On a desert island, the question of rights would not arise, even though the question of morality certainly would. On a desert island, a man would need a moral code, a knowledge of what is right or wrong for him to do, as much as he would need it in society. But as to rights, that is a concept which applies strictly to relationships among men. It is a social application of morality.
This is what I was trying to say. It's a social contract between men, between human beings. It's not just because you feel something should be a certain, that's not a right. Just because I don't want to get ahead of myself, but just because you need something, that doesn't make it a right. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'll just let her keep going.
I define a right as follows. Rights are those conditions of existence which are required by man's nature for his proper survival. Now, I want to emphasize that I use words here with the strictest precision. Those who have heard our lectures know what I mean by man's proper survival. That is the survival of man qua man, the survival in that form which his nature as a certain kind of living entity actually requires. And what the conditions of existence are necessary for his survival is also a metaphysical question. It rests really on the nature of reality, the nature of this earth, and the nature of man who has to survive on earth in a certain kind of manner. Since his survival is not an arbitrary issue, since he cannot properly survive by any random means, since there is only one proper way.
Okay, so she has this philosophy which is called objectivism, and um, it's basically it's in stark contrast to the metaphysics is explained by Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant and others say that this is an illusion. We're not really here. That's why I was trying to explain before when I was talking about how you can't be infinite unless you are in material form, because they're saying that this is all an illusion, that we can't know objective reality. And she's saying you can know objective reality based on your senses, and you can know objective truth. And so this, I mean, her philosophy goes with that whole thing that I was talking about before about the principle of self ownership, because your property belongs to you. And so when they take away your property, they're basically making you a slave, and it goes against the principle of self ownership. It's it's all about consent and against government coercion.
Of survival for him. And here I will remind listeners about the metaphysical base of the objectivist ethics. Since there is only one proper way for him to survive, his rights, that is that which he may or may not do in relation to other men, that which he may or may not do in society, has to be derived from the same by the same standard, from the same definitions. What does man's nature require for his proper survival? First of all, that he use his reason. It requires that he make rationality his perception of reality. The first concern and the basic virtue, and that he act on the rational judgment of his own mind. There is no way for him to survive, to provide even his simplest needs without some process of thought.
So this is her metaphysical. I mean, this is not the full argument, but this is basically a summary of objectivism, because she's laying out the foundation for how she defines rights. It's based on your right to self-ownership and your right to survive. Because when your rights are infringed, then that's basically a threat to your survival. So the entire thing is based on the principle of self-ownership and your right to survival.
Therefore, when he deals with others, those conditions which are required for the proper survival of man qua man, which doesn't mean mankind, but means every individual man, every member of a particular living species. That which is required for his proper survival constitutes his rights. Namely, by his nature, man has to support his own life by his own effort. Since survival is not provided to him by inanimate matter automatically, nor is it granted to him as manna from heaven by some superior power, man, in fact, by his nature, has to work for his own survival. His life depends on his own action.
Okay, y'all, this is just objective truth. This is not, I mean, I don't know if people's feelings are going to get hurt, but this is the law of nature. You are responsible for your own survival. Nobody has a duty to you, and she's going to get into that. She's going to explain that a little more in detail, but a lot of people get their feelings hurt when they are told that other people are not responsible for you, because they've been lied to say that we are our brother's keepers, and it's like, no, that's going to set you up. That's going to set you up if you think that other people actually care about you and that they're responsible for your well-being. That is not the way the world operates. So she's giving you the cold hard truth, which is that we are all responsible for our own survival. We are not our brother's keepers, and you can try to change. I mean, basically, you can try to go against that and say, "Oh, I'm just going to rely on other people," but you're really just setting yourself up for failure, because at the end of the day, when those people don't provide for you, you're basically shit out of luck. So you need to be self-sufficient no matter what.
In order to survive, he has to have the right to his own life. If man's survival, qua man, is our standard, then it is a right for man to support his own life. In order to do that, he has to be free to act on his own judgment. Therefore, he has the right to freedom. In order to decide what goals to pursue, he has to be free to choose his own values and then pursue and achieve these values if he can. And that is the right to the pursuit of happiness, which really means a moral right, the right to choose your own values and to work for their achievement. And since man is not a ghost, but an integrated entity which has consciousness and matter, in order to survive, man needs material property. He has to support his life by means of the product.
So y'all hear what she said. She said man is both consciousness and matter, right? Because there's some people who are saying we're just consciousness and the matter is just an illusion. We're not really here. I know this stuff is irrelevant, but when people start feeding you a bunch of gobbledygook and it doesn't make sense, you need to know what is objective truth. Because when they start pushing these false philosophies and belief systems that are not logical and you don't understand, they sound articulate, so you don't know whether to believe them or not. It's a bunch of nonsense. You are both consciousness and material. You are the will and its representation. You are actually here. This is not an illusion. You are in the real world where you actually have to survive. You have to eat. You have to provide for your own maintenance. That's just the reality of it. Yeah, I don't know how people are believing. There's this whole movement going on where they're saying we're not really here, and well, and they're saying it's not nihilistic, but it actually is.
Of his own effort. Therefore, he has the right of property, the right to work for his own values, for his own survival, and to keep the product, the result of his work. Now, this is the base of rights as I define them, and you can observe that I reject both current fallacies on this issue. Both the idea that rights are the gift of some supernatural power, that man is endowed with his rights by God.
Okay, so she's talking about natural rights coming from God. Well, I mean, she's right, but at the same time, at the time that they came up with the notion of natural rights, that was when the king was considered sovereign. And so because the sovereign was put in power by God, only God could challenge the king. So at the time, it was necessary to invoke God to challenge the king's authority. So, I mean, even though it's not based in fact, it was something that it was an argument which everyone could buy into, because back then everyone was religious. So yeah, we've evolved. Now we can get rid of God. It's not necessary to say that our rights come from God, but it's something that can't be challenged. It is absolute. So that's the reason why you invoke God, but it doesn't necessarily have to be God.
It is the supernatural base of right that has invalidated and undercut the concept of right. And simultaneously, I reject the modern substitute for the mystical view of rights, namely that rights, the source of rights is social, that rights are privileges or gifts of society. In the second case, not only could one never defend in logic or prove the idea that rights inhere in society, in fact it would be a contradiction in terms if an individual doesn't possess any right. There is no way for society to possess them, since society is only a number of other individuals. But more than that, if rights inhere in society, then an individual man exists not by right but by permission. Since he has no right to life, then society permits him to exist or he wants that permission anytime it chooses.
Okay, y'all. So there's this common misconception that our rights come from the Constitution. That is a misnomer. The Constitution is an enumeration of rights that existed under natural law prior to the Constitution. So it even says it in the Ninth Amendment. I don't know why attorneys never refer to the Ninth Amendment. It's like the forgotten amendment, which I think is probably the most important one. And if the government can create rights, that means that they can take it away. These are not social constructs. They exist based on nature, which basically, it doesn't mean that nobody can violate those rights. It means that if someone does violate it, then you can use force to defend your rights.
For the social source of right, the theory of the social source is really total denial of rights, because then man does not act on right but on permission.
Would you say, Ms. Rand, that government has no rights?
Government as such, none. Because after all, government is an institution. Now the members of government, the officials, are men, and they cannot have any right different from those of every other individual. All rights necessarily have to be universal, in the sense that if they are derived from the necessity and the facts of human nature, they would pertain to, equally, to all men. There is no other way to make the concepts of rights tenable or even intelligible. Rights belong to an individual, and since they're derived from his nature, the same rights belong to all individuals. Now, a member of a government has no rights different from any other man. You might say in his official capacity he has certain obligations or certain duties. So has every man. For instance, a businessman does not have a different right to life than, let's say, an artist. Only the form in which they exercise or implement their right to live is different. So in that same way, a government official does not acquire any new rights when he undertakes a certain job. The government, as such, as an institution, has no rights. But the government is the agent, in a proper free society, is the agent of the citizens. It is the servant of the citizens, and it has the delegated right to act for the citizens only in very specific issues. And you remembered our definition of the nature of government. I won't repeat here what are the proper functions of government.
Yeah, I'm going to do that also. She talked about government because people don't understand what the role of government is. Before we get too far gone, I'm going to address what she was saying. So there's this notion that states have rights. It's based on the 10th Amendment. States don't have rights. They only have duties and obligations. As she stated, only human beings have rights. So governments can't have rights. Corporations can't have rights. The only rights are the individual member, or the rights belong to the individual members, but they don't have special rights above everybody else. So the notion that corporations have a right to freedom of speech, that they have a right to make political campaigns that supersede that of ordinary men. No, that's bullshit. That is not a right. They um they don't have a right. They don't have a right to freedom of speech. They don't have any rights. Well, they have a limited right. They have a right to due process before you take their property or get impose a fine or anything like that. But they don't. I mean, they don't have the full scope of the Bill of Rights as human beings. Yeah, I don't know how they came up with that, and I don't know how we let that one slip.
Except to remind our listeners that the proper function in general terms of a government is to protect individual citizens from those who initiate physical violence. Therefore, the government has only a delegated right, but by itself, it can have no right. Now, shall I answer?
Okay, y'all hear this? The government has delegated rights based on human beings. The government cannot have rights more than the human beings. So that applies to everything. That it even applies to the Second Amendment. Y'all are saying, I mean, not y'all, because I'm assuming a lot of y'all are quote unquote woke, that they should take the government should take our guns away. It's like, but you want the government to have guns, but you don't want us to have guns. No, the government does not have more rights than you. The government's role is to protect your rights. They are a collection of the populace at large. So how can you say that the government should have guns and you shouldn't? That what you're essentially saying is that the government has greater rights than you, and you are just a subject or a slave. That's not liberty. And it's not just the Second Amendment. There's a lot of rights that people are saying that the government has that citizens don't have. It's like, are you serious? Are you fucking serious? You're trying to enslave yourself, and what's worse is that you're trying to enslave everyone else. You don't have the right to do that. You want to be a fucking slave, you be a slave. I'm not a fucking slave. I reject it. I would rather die.
The question, the first part of your question about why I would not recognize the right to minimum sustenance and
Yes, you're right. Government control. Government equals mind control. Government to control. Meant to up the mind. I don't know if I'm going to get to it, but Noam Chomsky actually talked about that. He was talking about the media, how the media is basically just an extension of the government, because in a so-called free society of democracy or a republic, the control comes through the mind. So the media is a control apparatus to get everyone to voluntarily submit to authoritarian institutions. So I don't know if I'll get to it, but yeah, Noam Chomsky addressed that.
Usual United Nations list of rights. Yes.
Well, there you have a complete contradiction. This concept of rights demands as a right values which do not in fact belong to man in nature. In other words, the right to a minimum sustenance means that a man without any effort on his part is entitled to sustain his life. Well, since nature does not provide men automatically with this sustenance, the only way of maintaining or implementing such a right would be to breach, infringe, and deny the rights of some other man. It means that some other man is charged with the unchosen responsibility to support the man who is guaranteed a minimum sustenance. It means...
Okay, so when people say they have a right to health care, they have a right to education, they have a right to, I would say a minimum standard of living, but I mean, that's kind of nuanced because corporations are exploiting people. But there should be no such thing as a private corporation anyway. All corporations used to be public, but we let that one slip under the table. I mean, we let that one slip too. But you don't have a right to somebody else's property. If you didn't earn it, it doesn't belong to you. Just because you need this or that. Okay, why are you having so many children if you know you can't provide for them? You know that your children need to be educated. Well, I mean, this is the whole thing. This is why everything is so upside down, because now people can make decisions not based on their own ability to provide for their offspring, but based on society. So you know that you're going to have children. You know that you're going to have a basic standard of living. You know that the government is going to provide education. You're going to have access to your minimum. I mean, your minimum needs are going to be taken care of, and so you can just pop out as many children as you want. Even if you lose your job, you're going to have a golden parachute, right? And we have anti-natalists saying that this is a duty. I'm sorry, that's a contradiction. It's it's self-defeating, because you're telling people not to have children while incentivizing them to continue procreating.
That some men are to be enslaved to the minimum or maximum needs of others. Not only is it a vicious concept, but whichever you might wish to call it, it cannot possibly be called a right. Nobody could, in fact, maintain the right of some men to enslave others and to demand the unearned from them. Since nobody gets any production, any material values, any physical substance from nature itself, nobody has the right to claim any minimum guarantee, because it can come only from other men, and nobody can claim the right to enslave other men.
When you discuss in your objectivist ethics the concept of survival, many readers and listeners, I think, misconstrue this in the following way. When you mention the term survival, they immediately think of sheer physical survival, and just that. Nevertheless, it might be argued that physical survival is a precondition of other kinds of survival, and the argument that I've heard from some people goes something like this. At least everybody should be provided for with regard to a minimum standard of living, because you just can't let people starve. If people are permitted to starve, of course, they die, and then no other or more worthwhile form of survival is possible to them.
Well, this argument is a blatant case of simple context dropping. When we speak of survival, I have gone to great lengths, both in the objectivist ethics and in Atlas Shrugged, to demonstrate what is the meaning of survival, and that the sense in which I use this term does not apply to the range of the immediate moment, that it is survival across the whole span of a human life, that survival, the brute physical survival of the moment as a standard usually ends with that moment, that it is one of the most disastrous policies that a man can accept. Therefore, first, to reiterate once more this point, when I speak of survival, I speak of the long-term lifespan survival of a man in every aspect that is open to his choice. And this would mean that at no time can man hold the immediate advantage or survival of any one issue or any one moment above his knowledge of the long-range cost. And
Okay, this is what I was saying before. Just because somebody is wealthy and they don't need their money right now, it doesn't mean that they're not going to need it at some point in the future. She's talking about long-term survival. So you may have a surplus right now, but you don't know what unforeseen events are going to happen. So it's not for someone else to arbitrarily say, I need it right now more than you. So I'm going to take it now. And then later, when you need it, it's no longer there. And now you're scrambling, trying to figure out how you're going to survive. You're trying to figure out where your next meal is going to come from. That's not how that works.
that a rational being does not live like an animal on the range of the immediate moment. This is precisely what man's proper survival forbids. Now, when you say that if we do not support certain people, they will die, and therefore nothing else is possible, this is not, first of all, metaphysically an issue open to our choice. Such is man's nature and man's position on earth.
It just is what it is. That's the state of nature. I mean, life is not pretty. It's not all sunshine and roses. This is what life is. It's sink or swim. You either provide for yourself and your family or you die. I mean, I don't know why people think that that life is something other than what I just stated. That is what life is. If you can't provide for yourself and your family, then you starve.
That if he does not provide for his survival, nature will not take care of him. Since this is so, the universal, rational law of morality applicable here is that every man is responsible for his own survival, and that he cannot become a mortgage on the life of another man. That to have the right of life.
Again, when she keeps talking about putting a mortgage on somebody else's life, she's speaking about the principle of self-ownership.
Does not mean that someone else has to lose his right and spend his existence supporting you. The confusion here is between the right itself and the content or the consequence and the result of that right. For instance, if you have the right to live, that means you have the right to work and produce the material goods of your survival. It doesn't mean that somebody else has to produce the result of your right and provide you with food because you need it.
I'm thinking now not so much of the people who are able to engage in productive labor but won't, as of the people who are handicapped and cannot, by their own nature, provide anything at all for themselves.
Well, in that case, and by their very definition, they can survive only by the assistance of those people who are able to help them. They cannot make their need a mortgage or a burden on the man without whom their own survival is not possible. It is in effect, if anyone were sincerely concerned with the plight of the handicapped, who incidentally are a small minority of mankind, but if one were sincerely concerned, then for their sake, if no better reason, one should leave the strong, the productive, the able men free, because they're the only ones who can provide for the handicapped. But then such provision or such act can be nothing more than charity. It can only come from the voluntary gift and, in effect, the surplus of the productive man when and if he wishes to help the handicapped. If he has reason to wish it, that may be a very fine act. But what I stress is that it is not a duty on his part and is not a right of the handicapped. A right has to be based on nature. If the handicapped is handicapped, he can only count on the kindness of the non-handicapped to help him. He cannot demand it as a right.
I wanted to emphasize strictly ethical questions today, but your last answer leads me to an economic question, which I'm sure would be of interest to many listeners as well. And it's this one.
By the way, that's the reason people used to have children, is so that they would have somebody to take care of them when they got older. And now they don't have to worry about that because now the government is going to provide for them. I don't plan on living that long. I'm not living to be an old person walking with a cane who's dependent on other people, but I'm not sure what everyone else's plan is. But yeah, you're either going to be taken care of by your children or everyone else is going to be taking care of you.
What would happen if we had a system of complete laissez-faire capitalism, except for one detail, namely that there would be a state subsidy in the form of relief for the poor. What then?
Well, what would happen is exactly what is happening today. The answer here does not need to be too theoretical. You can see it in practice. To answer briefly, however, the important theoretical point here is that if you established this kind of law or institution, it amounts to establishing the principle of collectivism and altruism. By passing that law, you have in effect based that law on the idea that some men have the right to claim an unearned support from others who have to assume that responsibility whether they choose it or not. This is the principle which makes a man's life, liberty, and property subject to the will of society. There is no other base on which one could justify this law. And if one did so, one would not be able to stop the process until the whole of society collapsed into totalitarian collectivism.
So the whole thing is that these rights, these inalienable rights, life, liberty, and property, they are not subject to the needs of everybody else. That's what inalienable means. It means that it is an absolute right, but yet the government is infringing on them anyway, just because it's expedient. It's, it's, oh, well, they need it, so this is the way things have to be done. But wait, I still have rights. Are we going to acknowledge the fact that you're violating my rights just because somebody else needs something, or just because this is the efficient way of doing things? But nobody questions it anymore. They just roll along with it, and this has become the new normal.
Now you have seen a small example of it with a very foreshortened, accelerated historical form. The idea of public relief and of supporting the needy at public expense was started in about 1932 or 33 exactly, by the Roosevelt administration. At that time, the claim of those who advocated was that we have to help temporarily in an emergency just the 1/3 of our own nation, which, according to Mr. Roosevelt, was ill-fed, ill-clothed, and materially underprivileged, whichever he meant. Now that was certainly a very evil, very improper, altruist, collectivist premise, but let us assume that people accepted it.
By the way, the US dollar is a complete Ponzi scheme, and that's what I want to go over this weekend. It's not backed by gold anymore because President Nixon went away from the gold standard, and now they're just printing money to where it's becoming worthless, and it's about to become worthless. And it's all started with the Roosevelt administration trying to, well, back then it was still backed by gold, but the same principle applies. There wasn't money to pay for all these programs, and they still were borrowing money based on the needs of others. And so this country is just racking up all of this debt, and we're not going to ever be able to repay it. So it's about to result in the economic ruin of the entire country.
And people accept it mainly because they might think that here we are one nation and a rather wealthy nation, and it's our own citizens. I think most people accepted that idea on precisely that kind of superficial reasoning, but kindness. Now, it hasn't taken a whole generation before we are made responsible not only for every emergency or famine anywhere on earth. Not only are we asked to support everybody on earth, but more than that, we are told today that we have no right to our own standard of living until we industrialize or allow to catch up with us at our expense every backward nation in the world. Today, by that same principle,
Okay, this is what I was telling y'all before about how her philosophy of selfishness also applies to public policy because those who are altruistic not only sacrifice themselves, they sacrifice their family, they sacrifice whole nations. And this is what's happening to America because we're giving away all of this money and we can't even pay our own debts. It just makes no sense. I believe Israel is the only, maybe it's not the only one, but Israel actually loans it lends more money than it borrows. So they're not in debt. They're making money off their currency. And yet we're giving money to Israel, and not just Israel, but all over the world as if we have money to spend. We don't. We don't. We're sacrificing ourselves. We're sacrificing the well-being of Americans. We can't afford to do it.
We are no longer asked just to help the needy of our own country in an emergency. We are asked to assume as a permanent responsibility the welfare and the support of all of mankind. And as I always add in such discussions, remember, they're now talking about interplanetary travel. Fortunately, we would never get to much of it on the collectivist premise, but follow this argument. If you remained on this premise and you discovered Martians who, instead of being more advanced, were more backward than we are, by that premise, we would have to support them also. But by that...
See, because even if you believe in that altruistic collectivist nonsense, we are still a nation, right? The government was put in. I mean, that is not the function of government, but even if you were to assume that that is the function of government to provide for Americans, where does the case I mean, how can you make the case that America is responsible for the entire world? Like they're taking our resources, we pay taxes for our own benefit, for our own rational self-interest, and then it's going to other people in foreign countries who did not pay into the pot. So how is that rational? It's not rational. It's more cannibalism, right? We're going to destroy our own country so that other countries can survive, and we're going to go around the world nation building, trying to force democracy and civilization on people who probably didn't need to be civilized, right? This is why I've been talking to y'all about how civilization actually corrupts people. Now they're going to be in debt. They're going to be hooked onto all of this modern technology. They're not going to be self-sufficient. They're not going to know how to hunt, how to forage. And because we decided that that was the better way for them to live, now we're responsible because we're the ones who imposed it on them in the first place.
At that time, nothing much would be left of your free society. This is why a principle is an absolute that permits no exception, and you cannot, out of charity, sympathy, or any other reason, introduce an evil principle into society and put it over on people by governmental force.
Right? She calls altruism evil because they're going to say that it's good, but really what you're doing is taking from one person by force and giving to another. So you are threatening that person's survival by taking away their property. So the problem with um, social services, right? You can say somebody needs it, but some of us want to be self-sufficient. We don't want to rely on the government. So if we save wealth, if we save whatever, um, then that ensures our own survival, right? But if you take it from us, now we're just like everybody else. Now we have to depend on the government. And some of us don't trust the government. So we don't want to be the government's bitch. We don't want the government infringing on our rights, telling us how to live, telling us that, oh, well, you can receive this assistance, but you have to get vaccinated first. No, I'd rather be self-sufficient. I reject your vaccination. I'll grow my own food. I'll get some cows or whatever, but I'm not taking that bullshit, and you don't have the right to impose that on me.
Law.
Very often people ask this kind of thing. Well, what should we have done in 1933? Let all these people starve? I take it a point you would wish to emphasize is that had there not been all the governmental meddling in the economy in the first place, no such crisis as that of 29 to 33 would have occurred in the first place.
Exactly. All depressions are the result of government interference in the economy, and the depression of 1929 in particular was due to the fiscal credit policies of the Federal Reserve Bank. It was caused by the government, and the thing to do was to decontrol as rapidly as one could. Only there weren't enough thinkers and statesmen at that time to propose such a plan.
Okay, she didn't even say this, but hopefully I'll be able to cover this over the weekend. But the economic collapse is the government's fault. Even back then, no matter where you go, anytime we had a national currency, it was the government's fault. When did we get the Federal Reserve? What year was that? I'm not sure exactly when it was, but oh, yeah, we got the Federal Reserve around the exact same time because they were trying to scare us into accepting this currency and to spend all this money to put us in debt so they can control us. And the government bought into it and they sold us out. This is the reason why this is the reason. So we had two presidents that were deleted, Lincoln and JFK, and they were both deleted for the same reason. They went against this fiat currency bullshit that we have now. They didn't, I mean, JFK, y'all can go and look this stuff online. I'm not making this stuff up. He gave a speech about these secret societies and how he basically got rid of the US dollar, these federal notes, and created his own or American currency, which we own, that wasn't privately owned, which is what the US dollar is. And the US dollar is about to collapse. So we're in trouble. Hopefully I'll be able to get to that over the weekend. But yeah, it's all the government's fault. Like somebody was saying something in my comment section about I forget exactly what he said, but oh, okay. So what I was telling somebody in my comment section is that without the US dollar, we would be forced to create a barter system. And so basically, oh, I know what he was saying. He was saying that we need the government to protect us from corporate control and the wealthy. And it's like, no, the government is what allowed them to become wealthy in the first place, because without them imposing the US dollar on us, and that the US dollar allows them to exploit people. It allows unfair trade. It allows large concentrations of wealth to go into the hands of a small elite. Without the US dollar, we would barter and there would be fair trade. Nobody would be able to become wealthy or to exploit people.
So government is called upon to cure the disease that government itself has caused. Would that be? Would you agree with it?
Exactly, and you see it going on to this day.
Nevertheless, one might ask, since government has caused, assume that government has caused the disease is there. Doesn't it require government action to cure it? This I've been asked many times in connection with your view.
Well, this really simply means that if you have a deadly disease and you have germs in your system which are killing you, shouldn't you then take a stronger dose of the same poison, introduce more germs, more virulent germs into your system in order to cure it? Obviously not. It is not government action that is required, but the repeal of government powers. If you have social problems or economic troubles in a society, just as...
Okay, I'm curious about anarchist schemes that work with mass society. If we had an anarchist system, there probably wouldn't be a mass society in the first place. We probably wouldn't have a population of 8 billion. And as I said, the reason that they're able to have so many children is because they have a golden parachute that they have a safety net. If they fail to provide for themselves, they're still going to have provision given to them by the government. Um, this, yeah. So yeah, and in a state of nature, they would have to exercise restraint. So they would know that, oh, I can't feed these children on my own. So and yeah, people, I don't know if this is going to get me in trouble, but basically in the past, when people couldn't provide for their children, before abortion, people were practicing infanticide. And now all of a sudden we're discussing abortion as if infanticide hasn't been practiced since the beginning of civilization. People have always controlled reproductive rights on their own without interference from the government. But to answer your question, anarchy is not about complete elimination. I'm glad you asked that question. It's not about the complete elimination of the government. As Noam Chomsky said, it's about illegitimate government. So if it's not based on consent, then it's illegitimate. Coercion is illegitimate. Um, as she was saying, the proper role of government is to protect your rights. So if the government is protecting your right, that is a legitimate um exercise of force. But okay, so essentially the core functions of the government that we need the courts, we need the police to enforce, or some type of executive um to carry out the judgments of the courts. And then we need some type of military force to protect us from foreign invaders. But the branch of government that we don't need is the legislature. We don't need a legislature controlling and regulating every aspect of our lives. Now, you could argue that the legislature is necessary to put checks on the judiciary, but that's really not happening. It's not there's really not a checks and balance. They're really on the same side. Um you need to have it limited in the first place, and I don't know. In a mass society, I think, okay, everybody doesn't agree with this, but you could have private militias. That's what the Second Amendment is for. So you could form private militias. You could form your own little nation and protect your own group. This is what I was talking about before about the freedom of association. You can choose to associate with like-minded people, form your own little community, and then form a private militia to protect your community. This is the reason why you need to have access to arms and not be limited by the government, because now the government has a monopoly on the use of physical force. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question, but I don't think there's one answer, because I don't think all anarchists agree. There are several types of anarchists.
In medicine or any other field, you should first of all, before you attempt a cure, discover the cause. And if you discover that the cause is a long series of government controls, and the only improvement possible is to start, the only cure possible is to start decontrolling and removing one by one the chains, the causes which led to this particular trouble or problem.
Do you think thousands of people in the United States might have starved during the process of decontrol, which would have lasted several years at any rate?
No, certainly not. To begin with, they were not starving. The United States has never yet known what starvation really is, if you talk in terms of comparison to Europe and the rest of the world. Private charity
Um, I feel like atheism hasn't been properly defined. So there is not a book, there's not a manual, there's no philosophy. It's basically just antinatalism with the alternative solution, because antinatalism posits that the solution is voluntary human extinction. So they seem to promote the idea of coerced extinction, blowing up the whole planet. Um, and that really seems to be the only distinction. I don't. I don't know. Like I said, they need to articulate what it actually is and how they're going to accomplish this. Who's going to blow up the whole planet? Like, most people are not anti-nihilists nor ethilists, and they fear their own annihilation. So how is that ever going to be accomplished? Um, and then their government is preventing private citizens from having access to arms. So what are you supposed to do? I don't know. It just and apparently, like I said, it's undefined, but from what I'm seeing, atheists seem to be vegan. I don't want to go down that path again because yeah, it is what it is. I don't know how I feel about atheism because it still is very vague and undefined, and they need to really make clear what their um distinction is with antinatalism, and there needs to be an actual book because some of us who are serious about philosophy, we need a book to actually clarify what it is and what it isn't. So I actually read both of he's written several books, David Benatar, and articles, but the two that deal with antinatalism, I read both of them, and I feel like I uphold them. I understand what it is. There's nothing in either book that says anything about veganism, so I don't feel that I'm being a hypocrite, right? If he said that vegan, you have to be a vegan to be an antinatalist, I would, I don't know, maybe I would take issue with it, but since he didn't, I feel that I am following the philosophy because I am sterilized, I don't have any children, I'm promoting antinatalism. But without a defined philosophy, it's hard to say what I think about it. If it includes veganism, then I don't support it.
Is what would have taken care of any actual acute need, but above all, opportunities for employment. What was needed was more jobs. In order to have more jobs, you set free the men who are able to create jobs, the businessmen, the industrialists, the financiers. You leave men.
Okay, so she's talking about the Great Depression. That was not a natural occurrence. And I don't know, y'all can call me a conspiracy theorist, but this is verifiable. Like they set this up. They made the economy a crash in order to get the Great Society. They knew exactly, they knew everybody was going to be in a state of panic. And when everyone is in a state of panic, they're willing to forego their rights. Just like this COVID bullshit. Now all of a sudden we don't have rights. Now all of a sudden we're put on house arrest and nobody questions it. Now all of a sudden you can't even go to church. Not that I support religion, but they still have a right to practice their religion. Now all of a sudden you can't go to school. You can't earn a living. You got to sit at home and depend on the government. And then private landholders have to rent their land for free or their property for free and never get compensated for that. And businesses are driven to financial ruin and nobody ever compensates them for that. This is what I'm talking about. You don't understand the difference between a right and a privilege. You have a right to provide for your own survival. And when these disasters happen, the Great Depression, COVID, whatever, which are usually constructed by the elite, everyone just forgets about their rights. They don't even know what their rights are. They just, oh, government, please protect me. I don't know what to do. Without you, I would just perish. I'm so weak. I'm a damsel in distress. Please protect me. Please go take somebody else's property. Please feed me with stolen wealth. It's just a complete disaster. Let me read this. Thank you very much for your answer, which Much appreciated. I also agree that local tribal communities work the best. The entire realm is controlled by the Sophia, I don't know how to, Femiurge and her Ancron and Archronic reptilians. Um, yeah, well, actually, local economies are more sustainable, but they're trying to make everything global to where you don't provide for everything. Now you're dependent on China, you're dependent on India, you're depending on Russia, and it's just like, no, if you're supposed to grow, or Mexico too, right? If you grew your own vegetables, if you made your own clothes locally, and that's what I'm talking about. When you become self-sufficient, it's more sustainable. You can get rid of this fiat currency and you can provide for your own survival. One person grows the potatoes, another person um you know makes dye for the clothing, another person um I don't know, knows how to build houses or whatever. Everyone has a trade. Everything is self sufficient. But we're all interdependent. When one person, like, one supplier goes down, then it's like a domino effect. So when the US dollar collapses, it's going to be a domino effect across the entire globe because they set this up this way. And now the entire world is going to feel the effects of um, the Federal Reserve's incompetence. Actually, it's not going to. Okay, it's going to be Asia, and it's also going to be Africa. Everybody's investing in Africa right now because Africa is so rich in resources. It's not going to be actual Africans that are going to be ruling it, but they're going to be ruling from Africa, and I believe also Israel. Um, but in terms of economic development, it's going to be Africa and Asia. But they're not going to be controlled by, the native population. They're going to be controlled by outsiders, and it's already happening right now. We already have agents coming in, taking over Africa, basically enslaving them and changing their way of life. A lot of people are moving to Africa because that's where the jobs are going to be. Basically, everybody's moving out of America, and so we're headed for a downfall, and it's happening very quickly.
Free to create jobs. You do not change them at a time when you need them most. And in fact, morally, you never change them.
Let me ask you at this point a question and then answer it and see whether you'd agree with the answer. They're both brief. The question is this one. Do you believe, Miss Rand, that all men should have bread before any men have caviar? And the answer would be, that I attribute to you, in order for all men to have bread, some men must have caviar. Do you agree with this answer?
Emphatically. If you say, is this what I would answer? Yes, if I could think of such a good remark so quickly. Yes, certainly, that sums up my views perfectly.
Okay, that's it. I probably should have done the one about the structure or the role of government before I did this one, but I'm not sure that people are going to watch them chronologically anyway. So I'm going to do that one over the weekend, and then I need to also do the one about the fall of the U.S. dollar because I'm not. Somebody was telling me, "Oh, that could never happen." Like, what do you mean it can't happen? It's a social construct. Of course, it can happen. I mean, there's nothing concrete about social constructs. Like, money is not something that exists in nature. So, if it's set up based on a shaky foundation and you're just printing money out of thin air, of course it's doomed to fail. So, um, yeah, that's all I have for now. I think I'm going to do another one tomorrow, and then I'm going to try. And I also need to do something about the eczema because people were asking about that. But I needed to do more research on it and actually get these videos together so I can present it on StreamYard. So, yeah, there's going to be more content coming over the weekend.